Good morning. Oops, I can't hear you, Paula.
There, that's better.
Yeah. Good morning.
Unfamiliar setting.
I'm in San Francisco. Where are you?
Oh, the Santa Fe.
Okay, so
What's
so
going on in
we're
San
both
Francisco?
we're both on early time today, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to drag myself out to do this. I've got a
I
big
know.
lazy
That's
streak since I've retired.
uh,
Hello, Miriam. Hello, Camille.
hey y'all. Yeah, I'm here for Academy Assisted Therapy training. So we're I actually have a gathering later today. So but it's good to see y'all. So the Davises are out and Tony's out. So it looks like it's going to be you and me.
Ah, I'm
And
going to
it,
have
it
to
may
quit showing up every time I show up. Nobody else does.
what's up with that? Yeah, well, it's summertime, so I realize a lot there's people moving and all kinds of stuff, but I appreciate you being here. I'll tell you what, why don't we do it this way? How about excuse me, if you will be the liturgist, I'll be voice of the people. And we'll keep it short today because I have to get to my shindig and it's just you and me, so we won't feel like we have to bear the burden of sparkling conversation too long. So I appreciate you being here. Let me see, and I go ahead and apologize because I'm on a hotel Wi-Fi, so it's a little bit iffy. Okay, let's see. Somewhere here is the liturgy. There we go. All right, can you see that?
I can.
All right.
Are you going to divide up the scriptures or are we just going to go with it?
Oh, how about oh yeah, I guess how about if you'll do the Hebrew Bible reading, I'll do the New Testament reading.
Okay. Today, in 1789, French insurgents, fed up with abuses of royal power, stormed the Bastille, a prison and armory. Although there were only 7 prisoners inside, freeing them marked the beginning of the French Revolution, widely interpreted as a class war between the rich and poor. Today also marks the feast day of John Keble in the Church of England. Keble was a priest, poet, and leader of the Oxford movement in the early 1800s, which sought closer kinship with the Roman Catholic Church. Today is also International Non-Binary Peoples Day, established in 2012. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
The reading is from Psalms 24. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants too.
Because God is the one who established it on the seas. God set it firmly on the waters.
Who can ascend the Lord's mountain? Who can stand in his holy sanctuary?
Only the one with clean hands and a pure heart, the one who hasn't made false promises, the one who hasn't sworn dishonestly.
The kind of person receives blessings from the Lord and righteousness from the God who saves.
And that's how things are. General that seeks him, that seeks the face of God. Selah.
Mighty gates, lift up your heads.
Ancient doors, rise up high so the glorious King can enter.
Who is this glorious King?
The Lord strong and powerful, the Lord powerful in battle.
Mighty gates, lift up your heads.
Ancient doors, rise up high so the glorious King can enter.
Who is this glorious King?
The Lord of heavenly forces, he is the glorious King. Selah.
The Hebrew Bible reading is from Amos 7 through 15. This is what the Lord showed me. The Lord was standing by a wall with a plumb line in his hand. The Lord said to me, Amos, what do you see? A plumb line, I said. Then the Lord said, see, I am setting a plumb line in the middle of my people Israel. I will never again forgive them. The shrines of Isaac will be made desolate, and the holy places of Israel will be laid waste, and I will rise against the house of Jeroboam with the sword. Then Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, reported to Israel's king Jeroboam, Amos has plotted against you within the house of Israel. The land isn't able to cope with everything that he is saying. Amos has said Jeroboam will die by the sword and Israel will be forced out of its land. Amaziah said to Amos, you who see things, go, run away to the land of Judah, eat your bread there and prophesy there, but never again prophesy at Bethel, for it is the king's holy place and his royal house. Amos answered Amaziah, I am not a prophet, nor am I a prophet's son, but I am a shepherd and a trimmer of sycamore trees. But the Lord took me from shepherding the flock, and the Lord said to me, go, prophesy to my people Israel.
Chapter 6, verses 14 and following. Herod the king heard about these things because this had become well known. Some were saying John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and this is why miraculous powers are at work through him. Others were saying he is Elijah. Still others were saying he is a prophet, like one of the ancient prophets. But when Herod heard these rumors, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised to life. He said this because Herod had married her, but John told Herod, it's against the law for you to marry your brother's wife. So Herodias had it in for John. She wanted to kill him, but she couldn't. This was because Herod respected John. He regarded him as a righteous and holy person, so he protected him. John's words greatly confused Herod, yet he enjoyed listening to him. Finally, the time was right. It was on one of Herod's birthdays when he had prepared a feast for his officials and military officers, and Galilee will give us half of my kingdom. She left the banquet hall and said to her mother, what should I ask for? John the Baptist's head, Herodias. Although upset because of Solemn Edge and his guest, he didn't want to refuse her. Woman, and she gave it to her mother. When John's disciples heard it in a tomb.
Dave, I keep losing you over and over again. You probably need to do the reflection.
Walter Brueggemann writes in The Prophetic Imagination, the prophet engages in futuring fantasy. The prophet does not ask if the vision can be implemented, for questions of implementation are of no consequence until the vision can be imagined. The imagination must come before the implementation. Our culture is competent to implement almost anything and to imagine almost nothing. The same royal consciousness that makes it possible to implement anything and everything is the one that shrinks imagination because imagination is a danger. Thus, every totalitarian regime is frightened of the artist. It is the vocation of the prophet to keep alive the ministry of imagination, to keep on conjuring and proposing future alternatives to the single one the king wants to urge as the only thinkable one. So we'll go into a time of prayer. I'll get us started. And then those of you listening, if you want to lift up a prayer request, feel free to do so. If you're streaming on Facebook or YouTube, you can just type your prayer request in the comments and we will incorporate it into our prayer. Let's go to God in prayer. Gracious God, in the peak of summer at a time when the world is heating up, when we are conscious of the heating up not only of the climate, but also of political discourse and violence, we ask you to cool things down, to cool the planet, to stop the inflammation. We ask you, Lord, to be a physician, just like you cure a fever, that you would cure what ails us. We lament the political violence of yesterday, the assassination attempt. We lament all forms of violence and oppression. We ask, God, that you will intervene in places where there is open conflict, like Gaza and Ukraine, and also places where there is hidden conflict in homes between people. God, we are reminded how often you proclaim peace. When the angels show up on Christmas, they proclaim peace to the world. You named Jerusalem the city of peace, and you promise that if we follow you, we will have peace that passes understanding. We ask you to bring that peace in our lives and peace to our world. And we lift up to you people in situations who are close to us and invite those of you who are listening to share.
Connemara,
Lord, hear our prayer. For Camille's mother,
Lord, hear our prayer. For Daryl Hardy,
Lord, hear our prayer. For all
for
those
the
traveling, including
brokenhearted,
us, Lord, hear our prayer.
for the hungry,
Lord, hear our prayer. For all those we've seen unhoused here in San Francisco,
Lord, hear our prayer.
gracious God, for those prayers, for the angry,
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for the prayers that we've named and those that we don't even know how to put into words. We give you thanks that you hear and that you answer. And we are confident that we can always pray the prayer that Jesus taught us. Holy One, our Mother and your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. And give us today the bread we need for today. Forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So, thanks to those of you who are here, and thanks a lot for being here. We have a slim crowd today. July is always a difficult month in church, regardless of where you are, because so many people are traveling. Some people are trying to get the last travels in before school begins. Um, just I thought today's scriptures are interesting. Last week we talked about prophets and Jesus as a prophet and how a prophet is welcome everywhere except in his hometown, as Jesus said. Except here in both of these stories, we see instances where prophets are not welcome outside of their hometown either. That that the life of a prophet is difficult. In the first story, Amos, who is from Judah in the south, has gone to Israel in the north and is doing his prophet's thing. He's talking to the king about how the king needs to change his policies, and he's prophesying doom and gloom. Amaziah, who is one of the king's advisors, he's like on the king's cabinet. He's one of the prophets the king employs. Goes to Amos and says to him, essentially, "You're an outside agitator. Go back where you came from and earn your prophet money there. You're, if you're going to be a prophet, go to your home and prophesy there. Don't be an outside agitator. Don't you come in here and prophesy to us." And Amos's response is, "I didn't even ask for this job. I tend trees. I'm a shepherd. I'm not a prophet, but God told me to come here and do this thing." And it's a great show of how the institution responds to reformers, right? Amos is a reformer, and this whole language of outside agitator, that's what's going on here. Amaziah is saying, go back to your home. You're an outside agitator. Don't come in here, and sort of also assumes that Amos is doing it for the same reasons that Amaziah is doing it. See, Amaziah is a professional prophet. He's employed by the king to be a prophet. And he says to Amos, essentially, you're stepping in my turf. If you're going to earn money doing the prophet thing, go earn money in Israel. And Amos says, I'm doing this for free. So it's a great twist on kind of how we think about legitimacy, authority, and what a prophet does. It's the same kind of language we heard attributed to or used against Martin Luther King Jr. and the people in the South who were complaining about civil rights activists coming in here, outside agitators, that kind of stuff. So it's a beautiful picture of what actual prophets face. The second story is a New Testament story, and it's a familiar one about John the Baptist. Now, this has often been shown in like classic art and stuff because the focus is often on Salome, the young dancing girl who's kind of a pawn in this whole story. Now, it's interesting to note Josephus, a historian of the same time of this story, does not say that John was killed because some of court politics, because of Herodias and King Herod. Mark actually almost makes Herod out to be a good guy. Josephus says, pretty point blank, Herod killed John because he didn't like his politics. He was afraid John was going to lead a revolution. Everyone knew John was a righteous man. Herod did this thing, and that's why God punished Herod later on. So the historian Josephus, who's not biblical, but he's telling a different story, really says Herod was afraid of John. Mark is doing something a little bit different. He's almost, again, I'm not exactly sure why he's almost giving Herod a pass, but he's essentially saying John was a victim of circumstance. That John was martyred because he got a little too personal, basically. But then when Herod hears the stuff that Jesus is doing, he says, "Oh, John's come back from the dead. John's returned," which kind of, I think, indicates more, it says more about Jesus than it says about John. It means that Jesus was a threat. Again, a political threat, kind of like um, Jeroboam sees Amos, that this guy is coming in here and he's posing a threat to my power. I wanted to include the quote by Brueggemann because I think Brueggemann gives us a slightly different understanding of what prophet means. He talks about the prophetic imagination. In both of these situations, prophets are talking about a different way the world could be. They're imagining different possibilities. And I think it's really hard for us in this season, in this time of political and world turmoil, for us to imagine a different way for things to be. And yet, I think that's really the point of the prophets. I think that's the point of the church. And I think that's why Jesus referred to the church as a community of prophets. We're supposed to imagine that things could be different and to put as much flesh on that as we can, to articulate that in a really specific and detailed way. And I think part of what we see, what the scriptures are telling us, especially Mark, who last week said Jesus wasn't welcome in his hometown, and then today gives us a story about how, John fell afoul of Herod, that prophecy is dangerous work, that articulating alternative futures, that talking about different ways that we could be is dangerous work. I'm I'm also full of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, where Jesus says, "Expect to be persecuted. Expect for people to laugh at you. Expect this stuff, because this is the way that he prophets." The notion of prophecy, the notion of activism and reform, you know, I often think about activist and reformer, the way we use those words. That really means prophet. And we know the history of activists and reformers. It's always facing overwhelming odds, articulating a dream that seems silly at first until it starts to gain traction. That these are the ways that we understand change happening. I think part of what these passages do to me is they force me to work on my theory of change. And not just theory, but how do we practice it? How do we imagine change happens if not for prophets? Anyway, that's the question I kind of want to leave you with, and that I had imagined might launch some discussion. I know we're having some technical difficulties and we're a slim crowd, so um, but I would be curious how y'all respond. Um, how do we imagine change happens if not for prophets?
In another one of Brueggemann's book, Finally Comes the Prophet,
Hmm.
he equates prophecy with poetry, and so much of the prophecy in the Old Testament is written in poetic form. But I really love the idea of the prophetic being tied closely to the creative, to the artistic, the poets who can put things into words that we don't even notice most of the time because we're in such a rush. Uh, the artist, I don't see how anyone could look at the painting Guernica and not want to do everything possible to end war. That is the most prophetic painting
Mm.
I think I've ever seen. But
Yeah.
yeah, I love that time, the creative to the prophetic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so often, I've said before, prophets were like performance artists. Oftentimes they were doing wild and crazy things, symbolic
Things that would
things.
not be acceptable in our churches.
Exactly, right. Like, yes. Yes. Walking through the streets naked, lying on your side for weeks at a time. Yeah, absolutely.
Dancing at a gay wedding.
Possibly. Possibly so. Yeah, it's hard for me to articulate how how poignant this seems to me after, the events of this weekend. Um, what it means to be prophetic, to actually, try to put what is happening right now in some kind of context, because that's also what prophets did. They said, this is what's going on, and this is the context, bigger picture.
And I think that
Um,
that
Way of
phrase
articulating the
right
truth. Yeah.
now is so important. I was raised where prophecy was something that was going to happen in the future one day. Uh,
Yeah.
Prophecy was the prophets telling what was happening right then for the most part.
Mhm.
Uh, and so much of prophecy has already happened, and it's not necessarily something that we should be expecting to happen in the future. And
Exactly.
Camille says, I sometimes look at the church having found a way to make change happen by backing their prayers with votes to create the world they would prefer.
Yeah. Yeah. White Christian nationalists have no problem with a theory of change, do they? Yeah, we've seen that spoken into being. I think alternatives is harder. I think it's like really, uh, I wonder about how much energy we actually spend describing the future that we believe God wants, and thinking in abstract terms, like, oh, everyone being in brotherhood and inclusive. But what does that like actually look like? You know, when we talk about, celebrating the fact that people can create different kinds of families, that don't have to look like the of religious or different backgrounds would treat each other with hospitality, and if refugees come into a country, that they'd be welcomed, for the innovations they bring, the energy they bring, um, what that would actually look like. I think oftentimes realities, and we need to spend more time speaking in specifics. Um, anyway, yeah. Other thoughts, responses?
Just that I don't remember many of the prophets ever choosing to be prophets. It was more something that was thrust on them, um, that they didn't have a choice about. And it's like they could, well, I guess any artist sees things that other people don't see, and then they try to shape it into some kind of physical material form that affects others.
Yeah.
And that's got to be a hard life.
Yeah. Especially, yeah, when you feel like you're doing something not because it's a choice, not because it's earning you money or you're getting something out of it, but because it has to be spoken, or this
Or when you can
has to
clearly see something that
this has to
nobody
be done.
else sees and they think you're crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Camille said when people do
Like I
speak
this